Everybody knows the ever-increasing problem of buying too many games that you never get around to playing. So, in order to combat that problem, I've decided to keep a monthly log of which games I've beaten. So every month I'll make a video, tell you which games I've beaten, and tell you my opinion on them. This idea was originally taken from a channel called The Fossilizer. I think he's super underrated and you should check them out. I won't be talking about each game for like super long. I don't want this video to be 2 hours long. I'll just give you like a brief rundown of the game. I'll also be ranking the games from worst to best in my opinion. Also, this video is made completely for fun. Don't take it too seriously, it's just my shitty opinion at the end of the day. And yeah, let's get started. So, Street Fighter 1. Easily the worst game on this list, no contest. And since it's an 80s arcade game, I'm not too surprised. Arcade games were always about trying to get as much money out of kids with random bullshit instead of being an actually good game. Don't get me wrong, there are good arcade games, but there's a reason why only a few of them are talked about. Street Fighter 1 is as bare bones as a fighting game gets. There are only 2 characters which are reskins of each other, and they both have only 3 special moves. I don't expect much from such an old game, it's completely understandable, but the problem lies in how bullshit this game is. The game's bullshit meter is off the charts, and it goes both ways. The first half of the game, you're 3-shotting every enemy with 3 Hadoukens that they don't even try to block. It's so easy, it's so dumb. And then the other half of the game is the enemy moving at lightning speed to one-shot you without you having any way to do anything. I'm talking about arcade mode, so it could be a completely different story if you're playing against a player, maybe it's fun then, but I don't imagine getting 3-shot is that fun either. Overall, this game wasn't that good. My experience was completely terrible. There's probably one guy who thinks this game is good. I don't. Thank God for the save feature in the 30th collection, otherwise I'd have been doomed. Not much more to say about this game gets an F. Next up is Strider. In Strider, you play as one of the last Striders from your clan, and you are the only one who can stop the evil dictator from taking over the world. It's a platforming game where you collect elemental power-ups to progress and destroy obstacles. Yeah, this game is boring as fuck. The combat doesn't feel that smooth, none of your attacks feel like they have any impact. The power-ups are super boring, they're like Ice Sword, Fire Sword. They're not interesting. There is a ton of backtracking. All of the bosses start to feel the same after a while, and they reuse a couple of bosses even. The story is so boring, I forgot about it 1 minute after the game. I honestly couldn't tell you one thing about the story. Nothing's terrible about this game, but everything is just well below average. I'd give it a D+, not much to say. Next up is Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior, Street Fighter 2 Apostrophe Champion Edition, and Street Fighter 2 Apostrophe Hyper Fighting. Now, since these games are basically the same game, copy and pasted, I'll be rating them as the same. My first question is, who the fuck named these games? I mean, come on, Street Fighter 2 Apostrophe is that the best name you can get? It makes no fucking sense, but we'll go with it. Now, this game actually has a roster instead of, 2 characters. And let me say, Capcom made such a good job on making a memorable cast. I knew almost all the fighters before I played the game, and now I feel like I know their entire moveset after playing the arcade mode once. This might be the best cast in any fighting game ever. Not from a gameplay perspective, but from the perspective that almost none of the characters feel like they're tacked on or don't have a purpose. All of them are iconic in their own ways, and none of them feel like they don't belong. Now, onto the gameplay. Unlike most other fighting games, the learning curve is actually pretty forgiving. Most characters have only 2 or 3 specials that aren't that hard to execute, unlike most modern fighting games where each character has at least 10. And this game feels super rewarding to play too. It feels like you're getting better after each and every round. The skill curve is just perfect. And unlike Street Fighter 1, everything does a one-shot, so it's actually fun. The soundtrack is extremely good too. Each character has its own theme that fits them, and they're all bangers which get you into the mood of fighting. And this game also looks amazing for such an old game. The pixel art is just on point. One minor complaint I have though is that the AI can get extremely annoying to play against. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels like they don't have to predict what you do. They just the first frame you input a button, they react to it instantly. It's kinda annoying, but I know there's nothing you can do about it. I give it a B since my experience was playing against AI and not people. I imagine this game would be much higher if I was playing against friends or something like that. So far my list has only consisted of Capcom games, and this game is no different. Resident Evil 0 is a survival horror game which is supposed to be the prequel to Resident Evil. This game, just like the first, didn't really feel like a horror game to me. It felt more like a shitty action film more focused on blasting zombies and looking cool than actually scaring or creeping you. Which is fine I guess, but don't play this expecting it to be like Amnesia or Outlast or anything like that. The atmosphere is pretty dense, but it's not nearly enough to compensate for the cheesiness. The story isn't that great, and to be honest, it's confusing as fuck. I have no idea what happened and I'm not interested in finding out. There's some guy in a dress who is made of leeches or some shit like that. The story wasn't conveyed that well. Also, the fact that this is happening before Resident Evil 1 doesn't really make sense to me, since the main character in this game is Rebecca, a character from the first game, and she goes through a ton of shit during this game and never mentions anything in the first. It would have made more sense to me to take a lesser character who didn't have that much screen time, like the guy who died to the shark or the guy who died to the tunnel. I don't remember the names. The controls aren't the best, but they're usable, and because the camera is in a fixed position and constantly switching perspectives, it can really fuck with you, especially if there's enemies in the room. The aiming isn't that good either. Aiming horizontally is already enough of a pain, but aiming vertically is impossible at times. It has 3 fixed positions: up, down, and middle, and if any enemy happens to be in between those places, it's literally impossible for you to hit them. It's super annoying when there comes a very small enemy and you can't hit them at all. The puzzles are incredibly cryptic and bullshit. They're not as bad as in the first game, but they're pretty bad. The bosses aren't the greatest either. 90% of the times you aren't equipped for them because there's nothing indicating the next boss, and your inventory will be full of puzzle items. So all I've done is complained about this game. So what makes it so high on the list, you might ask? Well, the resource management and explorations are simply that good. The resources are so scarce you have to save every last bullet and healing item just to survive. And the exploration is extremely good too. The progression paired with the maze-like buildings, paired with the atmosphere and the music and that door animation, it's too good. I highly recommend using a guide though, because this game can get pretty cryptic at times. This game can suck you in very hard, but just like it sucks you in, it just sucks you out with the stupid cheesiness and bullshit. So overall, I rated a B. Final Fantasy X is my first Final Fantasy game, and let me say, if the rest of the series is like this, I'm on board. Sure, the story isn't that amazing and it gets pretty convoluting towards the end, but it has a weird charm to this that makes it enjoyable. The cast is also great, everyone fits their role perfectly and everyone feels like a part of the story, except for this one furry tiger guy. He was just kind of there, and yeah, the main character can be kind of a brat at times, but it's not that bad. People like to shit on the voice acting a lot, and yeah, it's not the best, but it's not as bad as people say. There are a few moments though that really make me question decisions, but otherwise it's okay. The world feels super alive and the music is amazing. I will never get sick of that battle music, and the overworld music is sick too. I wasn't expecting a great combat system since I'm used to turn-based combat being like Pokemon where you just brainlessly spam one ability, but to my surprise the combat went pretty deep. Wasn't anything too insane, but it definitely had strategy to it. There are a ton of mechanics like summoning Aeons, super meters, managing MP, status effects, switching characters, lowering defenses, buffing characters, just a whole lot. One thing I don't like though is how often they recycle enemies. The enemies from the first areas will appear in the last areas in just a different coat of paint. Most of the bosses are pretty good, but a lot of the late game bosses cross the line into bullshit. They would just like be one-shotting your entire party, healing a ton, and at the end you would have to cheese them. Since this is an RPG, there is a fair bit of grinding. This is what kinda ruined the experience for me, because I got stuck on one of the final bosses and had to grind for ages. I know some people enjoy that shit, but personally I hate it. I give it overall a B+. Payday 2 is a multiplayer co-op horde shooter where you play as a set of masked bank robbers who go on various heists and shoot down hordes of police. The heists are usually just break into a place, steal the shit, wait for an escape, throw the shit into the escape, and then get out. That's how most heists go, but there are a lot of variety to them. There can be like hostage taking, cooking meth, there's a lot of stealth also. The stealth, I don't like the stealth, it isn't the best. I never like stealth when it's in first person because so much information is hidden from you. Unlike in a third-person game where you can see around you actually. There were some aspects of the stealth that I liked though, like if you kill a guard, the control will check up on him and you have to pretend to be the guard on radio, and I like they have to put the bodies in a bag and throw them out, and there are okay things about the stealth, but I personally don't like it. The best part of the game though is the shooting. It's perfectly intense. Being stormed by waves and waves of police forces and barely holding your ground is so fun. Now you might think this gets boring after a while, but surprisingly it doesn't. There are a lot of special police to mix up the game a lot, just like the Left 4 Dead Special Infected. There are police with shields that you have to get around, there are police with tasers that you have to avoid at all costs, there are snipers that you have to avoid, where you have to avoid his field of vision and get close enough to kill him. There are bulldozers that are basically tanks and you need a lot of firepower to take them down. There are cloakers that will come and backstab you and instantly down you, so you have to watch out for them. It's the perfect mixing up of an otherwise repetitive gameplay. On easier difficulties, the game does become kind of mindless. You just stand in the middle of all of them and just spray them down, but I recommend playing on the harder difficulties. The progression is super fun. You're constantly unlocking new weapons, new weapon modifications, more abilities on your skill tree, more safe how to upgrades, more cosmetics. It really makes you feel like you're getting more influence and power as the heist gets crazier too. The game is also full of personality. The game doesn't take itself seriously at all. Normally I find the radio guys talking to you in games pretty annoying, but in Payday I find them actually very enjoyable. I love having Bane and Vlad cracking jokes. It makes the atmosphere so much better. There are a ton of playable characters too. They are no different from each other, but it really makes you feel like a heisting family who can take on the world. I feel like the heists are either very extremely fun or extremely tedious. There's not really much of a middle ground. And there are also problems with AIs like shields turning their back to you or cloakers just standing still and doing nothing. It's also kind of annoying that you can't make your team's AI pick locks and do other tasks. It's kind of frustrating, but apart from a few minor complaints, this game is really fun. If you like Left 4 Dead, you will definitely like this. I give it an A-. Shadow Tactics Blade of the Shogun is a stealth game located in the 1600s of Japan. You play as a group of mercenaries who work for the current Shogun and are trying to stop an uprising. The game is from a top-down perspective and it's almost exclusively stealth, so you can't Rambo this game like you can a lot of other stealth games. which makes the game so much more challenging, but in a very fun way. The game will also be very ruthless. If someone spots you or sees a dead guard, 5 more guards will pop out to patrol the area. You will be constantly locked in these extremely hard situations which you have to think your way through. The characters also have a great dynamic. There's Hayato the ninja, who is well-rounded and has a bit of range. There is Mugen the samurai, who is great at dealing with multiple people. There is Yuki, who is great at luring guards and tricking them with her flute and her traps. There is Takuma the sniper, who can snipe enemies from really far away but doesn't have any melee attacks. And then there's Aiko, who can disguise herself and blind the enemies, which is kinda OP, but it's fun. The characters have great chemistry in-game and in the cutscenes. This game makes you feel like a mastermind for planning ahead and making these crazy plans that end up somehow working. It's extremely satisfying. The levels also have multiple ways to approach them, which gives you the freedom to do whatever, which I really like. One complaint I have though, that the story isn't that good. I predicted the plot twist halfway through and I feel like we didn't get to spend enough time with the characters, but other than that, I feel like this is an extremely solid game which doesn't fall short on anything. I feel like every aspect of the game is above average except maybe the story. I give it a solid A. Now, this was a really tough call between Shadow Tactics and this, but the best game I played this month is Doom 2016. In Doom, you play as this guy who's trapped in hell, surrounded by thousands of demons. He does what any sane person does and beats the ever-loving shit out of every single one. The game's primary gameplay loop is so satisfying. Fighting 30 demons at once and coming out top is probably one of the best feelings a game can give you. The game constantly wants you to be in action. This is not like other shooters where you hide behind the cover like a bitch and pop out every now and then. In Doom, you're running around the stage and platforming while killing demons one by one. In a cover shooter, when you're low on health, you hide behind the obstacle until you regain that health back. In Doom, you have to get right in front of the demon and melee him to death to get your health back. Just listening to the music alone makes you feel like the most powerful being in the world. Some problems I have with the game though is that the levels can be a bit confusing at times, the bosses are pretty lame, the game gets extremely repetitive towards the last third, but the core gameplay loop is so fun that none of that really matters. This one deserves an A. So yeah, that's pretty much my entire video. I hope you liked it. I hope that I'm able to keep a consistent upload schedule, but I already know that's not happening. And bye. See you next month.